Composite Portraits of Criminal Types by Francis Galton. Imagine standing in a Victorian laboratory, surrounded by stacks of photographs, a flickering gas lamp casting long shadows across faces. Dozens of faces, layered one on top of another, merging into a single ghostly image. This is the world of Francis Galton, and the artifact we're looking at today is one of the most fascinating and most troubling objects in the history of science. The plate before us is titled Specimens of Composite Portraiture, created by Francis Galton around 1883. It is not a painting. It is not a drawing. It is, in the most literal sense, a scientific experiment printed on photographic paper. The board is divided into three broad sections. At the top, we see composite portraits made from personal and family photographs. Two sisters merged into one face. Alexander the Great reconstructed from 6 different ancient metals, and a family composite blending 6 members, male and female. These upper examples feel almost tender, almost artistic. But as your eye travels downward, the mood shifts entirely. The middle section is titled Health, Disease, Criminality. Here, Galton composites 23 Royal Engineers, officers and privates, to find the face of military health. Beside them, he layers the faces of tuberculosis patients, 6 cases merged, then 9. And in the right column, the most disturbing column, he presents what he calls criminal types. 8 cases composited, 4 cases composited. The faces are blurred and averaged, yet somehow they stare back at you with an unsettling directness. At the bottom of the plate, Galton turns to consumption, tuberculosis in its chronic form, comparing consumptive women against healthy ones, even creating a co-composite of 2 groups, 56 cases merged into a single haunting oval portrait. The technique itself is ingenious. By exposing multiple photographic negatives onto a single plate, each for only a fraction of the total exposure time, Galton could mathematically average human faces. The result smooths away individual features and preserves only what is statistically shared, what Galton believed to be the hidden type beneath the surface of individual variation. To understand this image, we must understand its creator. Francis Galton was born in 1822 in Birmingham, England, into a wealthy and exceptionally gifted family. His grandfather on his mother's side was Erasmus Darwin, the physician-philosopher and grandfather of Charles Darwin himself. Galton and Darwin were therefore cousins, and this family connection would shape Galton's entire intellectual life. He was a child prodigy. By 2 years old, he could read. By 4, he was doing basic arithmetic. He studied medicine, then mathematics at Cambridge, but never completed a formal degree. It didn't matter. His private fortune freed him from the need for institutional employment, and he spent his life as a gentleman scientist, pouring his energy into an astonishing range of fields. He invented the concept of the weather map. He developed fingerprint identification systems still used today. He pioneered the statistical concepts of regression to the mean and standard deviation. He was a geographer, an explorer, an anthropologist, and a prolific author. But he is remembered today most of all for one word, a word he coined himself in 1883, the same year this composite portrait plate was published. That word is eugenics. Galton was profoundly shaped by his cousin Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, published in 1859. Where Darwin described natural selection operating across geological time, Galton asked a chilling question. What if human beings could accelerate that selection? What if society could be engineered to produce more people with desirable traits and fewer with undesirable ones? This composite portrait plate is eugenics made visual. Galton genuinely believed that criminality, disease susceptibility, intelligence, and moral character were not just influenced by heredity, they were written into the face. By averaging the faces of criminals, he hoped to find the criminal type. By averaging consumptive patients, he hoped to find the consumptive type. The face, in his framework, was a window into the biological and moral interior of a person. This idea was not new. It drew on a long tradition of physiognomy, the pseudoscience of reading character from facial features, going back to ancient Greece. But Galton gave it a modern, quantitative, photographic respectability that proved dangerously persuasive. It is important to say clearly, the science is wrong. There is no face of criminality. There is no composite type that reveals moral character or disease susceptibility. The entire premise rests on a fundamental confusion between correlation and causation, between social conditions and biological destiny, between statistics and human truth. The faces of Galton's criminals were overwhelmingly the faces of poverty, men arrested and photographed by a Victorian justice system that criminalized the poor with extraordinary efficiency. The faces of his consumptive patients were the faces of overcrowded tenements, of malnutrition, of industrial squalor. Galton looked at the symptoms of a broken society and concluded he was seeing the fingerprints of bad heredity. And yet, the image is beautiful in a deeply uncomfortable way. The composite faces have a dreamlike, almost painterly softness. They look like no one and everyone simultaneously. They are, unintentionally, one of the earliest examples of what we now call computational photography, the mathematical averaging of visual data. The technique Galton pioneered is used today in face recognition software, in age progression imaging, in medical imaging analysis. The method survived. The ideology, thankfully, did not, though not before eugenics inspired legislation across the United States, forced sterilization programs across Europe, and ultimately contributed intellectual scaffolding to some of the 20th century's most horrific atrocities. Francis Galton died in 1911, celebrated as one of the great polymaths of his age. His composite portraits were exhibited at the International Health Exhibition in London. They were praised in scientific journals. They were considered the cutting edge of applied statistics. Looking at this plate today, we see something more complicated than either genius or villain. We see a brilliant mind, genuinely trying to understand the world through data, but blinded by the assumptions of his class, his era, and his culture, assumptions so deeply embedded that he could not see them as assumptions at all. That is perhaps the most important lesson this image carries across the decades. The tools of science are only as honest as the questions we ask of them, and the questions we ask are always shaped by who we are and what we already believe. These faces were real people, the criminal, the soldier, the consumptive woman in her oval frame. They were photographed, averaged, and erased into a type. Galton's great mistake was forgetting that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis, please subscribe and leave a comment below. What other works would you like to explore? See you next time.